Nice. Yeah, you know what? I didn't look at all of the analytics on your side. I mean, I got feedback over my messenger when I shared it that way, but I didn't look at all of the analytics on the post. So that's a good thing. That's a
Yeah,
good thing.
it's an
Yeah.
interesting thing. Hey, everybody, this is Dr. William Clark here for Leadership Conversations. This is the show where we talk about leadership according to the world that matters to you. Now, back for popular demand, we have Charles Batts here. And the last time, Charles, we were together, we were talking about, I think it was resumes and interviews and prepping for that stuff. And people really enjoyed that. So, one of the topics that we started to talk about that got left off the table that we wanted to pick up on was how to look at your career as a business owner and to develop an entrepreneurial mindset. So we wanted to come back and just have that conversation. But before we get started, Charles, you want to just fill people in on who you are, what you're doing, and where they can find you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Dr. Clark, great to be back with you. Appreciate it. I am a director at the American Job Center in Hartford, Connecticut. We have offices all over the North Central region. I had mentioned towards the end of our last conversation ways that folks can get in touch with the American Job Center. It's been established through the Obama administration that a lot of the job centers across the country have gone through a rebranding over the last several years. So you can find an American Job Center everywhere in every state across the country, including U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico. So the American Job Centers are all over the place. And in particular, here in Connecticut, the state is divided into 5 regions. And I work at the North Central region, which is kind of right in the middle of the state there, Hartford and Tolland counties. My particular office is in Hartford, but we also have locations in Bristol, New Britain, Enfield, and Manchester. And one of the best ways is if you go to our board's site, our workforce development board that funds and organizes the American Job Centers. That's Capital Workforce Partners. If you go to capitalworkforce.org, that's one way to identify our locations, get in touch with our orientations that way. Folks can also go to ctdol.gov, and you can find the American Job Centers not only in our region, but in other regions across the state as well.
Great. So here's the question that I realized I did not ask you that I should have asked you before you got started last time. And even if I did ask you last time, I probably would ask you again because people tend to give different answers. So every time people come on this show, I ask them, how do they define leadership? So since I didn't get the chance to have you define it last time, off the top of your head, based upon your experience, how do you define leadership, Charles?
Sure. So a term that I like to use a lot, a term I'm sure you're very familiar with as a fellow brother in the faith, is servant leadership. And so I define leadership very much based on the life and model of Jesus Christ and the example that he set before us. So for me, leadership encompasses a couple different categories. Number one, a leader is someone who's knowledgeable about either one particular subject matter or a variety of subject matter. But I believe leaders have to be knowledgeable. They have to know what they're talking about. They have to know what they're doing. I believe leadership also encompasses a doing aspect, which is very important on our team here in particular. One of the things that's very, very important for me is that all of our leaders have the ability, have the capacity to function in all of the direct service roles, all of the frontline roles. So a leader can step in and fill in for any member of the team if someone is ill, if someone has vacation, so that you got to be able to roll up your sleeves and do the work. That's very important to me. And thirdly, a leader has vision. And whether you're in the position to kind of cast a vision and delegate and assign responsibility so that the vision comes to fruition, or if you are someone that is working a job, someone that is serving the front line, you still have to have vision for where you're going individually, personally, where your organization is going, how you can fit in and support that. So knowledge, the ability to do the work, and to have a vision. Those to me are the 3 pillars of servant leadership.
Yeah, I like that. And let me just chime in here. So, one of my professors, Dr. Kathleen Patterson, has written extensively about servant leadership, and it is based upon the servant model that Jesus created and has established for many. And for those of you unfamiliar with that model, at the end of the day, I define leadership, Charles, as influence. And
Okay.
influence shows up in a variety of ways and mechanisms. One of those
Sure.
mechanisms is, as you said, through servant leadership. And if for those of you not familiar with the Christian faith or belief system, ideally Jesus, he influenced a whole lot of people through service. So when you
Sure.
hear stories about him healing or serving or helping or assisting or having a conversation with someone or opening doors for people, it was an act of service that ultimately benefited the individual on the receiving end. And so for many leaders who find themselves in a position where they want to be most impactful, ideally it's the act of service. And Charles, I would say that service doesn't mean you become the footman of your staff, right? You're not
Hmm.
the you're not kind of at the beck and call of your staff, but ideally, the way I envision servant leadership in today's world is, as you talked about, the function of doing, that if you're able to do something for your staff to help them get better, whether it's
Yes.
training, opening doors, providing resources, providing access to information, etc. It is your duty to serve in that way. In some cases, it's your duty to fight for your staff, to fight
Hmm.
battles for them that is
Hmm.
not necessarily up
Hmm.
for them to fight. It's your job as the manager leader. It's your job to defend them. It's your job to take a bullet for them, even if it's not your fault. It's your job to be their fullback, if you will, when you're busting through a line
Yes.
of some sort.
Yes.
And I love when you said leaders are knowledgeable. I love that. One of the examples that I talk about often, and is based upon an example that's a couple years old, when I was in the Atlanta airport, and we were in a whole lot of we were just trying to get our rental car, and the line was backed up, and you can tell who was frontline staff and who was the manager. And what was fascinating to me, of course, being the leadership nerd that I am, watching the manager come from the back and
Yep.
take over one of the stations, and if not as fast or faster than her frontline staff, got
Sure.
everybody processed. And it fascinates me because she's behind the scenes making sure the numbers are right, making sure the cars are there, making sure the money is coming in. But she can also
Correct.
do the job of frontline staff. That always fascinated me because I agree with you that you can't be a leader if you don't know the job of your staff. Then you said
Correct.
doing, and of course vision. And I think we'll ultimately talk about vision in today's podcast.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Yeah, I totally agree. Without getting too philosophical, too ideological, I think one of the fascinating things, particularly as we look at the servant model, as Jesus was kind of coming on the scenes, one of the first things he does is serve at a celebration, serves at a wedding. Sort of the first example of him marking, to the region, to the area, I'm here, I've arrived, is he allows the festivities to continue by turning the water into wine. And, very understated. Didn't raise anyone from the dead right away. Didn't walk on water right away. This very simple, right? Very simple, understated, yet very powerful and moving example of changing the environment, of having influence. Love that,
Yeah.
William, having influence to allow those festivities to continue and to begin to grow a reputation. You save the best for last. That's
Yeah,
where that
yeah,
expression comes from, right? You save the best for last.
so he
Talk
saved the
about
advanced
impact.
level servanthood for later, right? The raising of the dead. That's advanced level service.
Right. Right. We'll get there. We'll
Oh,
get
we'll
there.
get
We'll
there.
get
Yeah.
there. We're just not going to open. We're not going to come out the box with that one. We'll get there, though.
We'll
Don't
levitate
worry.
later. Yeah.
Yes,
The
sir.
funny thing is, people use that story about the party to suggest Jesus was the bartender. Like, no, no, no,
Not quite.
that wasn't the
Not
point.
exactly. We'll walk that back a little bit. Let's
Yes, yeah. Man, there's so much in that story that we probably could just stay
sure.
on that. But let's talk about what we can talk about, right?
Mm.
I agreed with everything you shared in our last session together, and when you started to lay the groundwork of being entrepreneurial and a business owner, or at least having a mindset when it comes to your career. So I definitely wanted to
Right.
dig into that. So let's start the conversation here, Charles. You deal with employers a lot in your work, and
Yeah.
coincidentally, I'm in the same business as you, with a slightly different viewpoint. But we do deal with employers on both our ends. What are you hearing from employers as you talk with them when they say, "I need my employees to have this"? What are the top three attitude adjustments people need to make that will be responsive to the needs of employers today's time?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think it's an important topic to begin to address. And not surprising to you, I'm sure, maybe surprising to some of your listeners, is the top three attitude adjustments are not necessarily things that require any kind of a degree, advanced study. Number one is critical thinking, the ability to think, process information, be in a situation where you're presented with information and you can make an informed, empowered decision based on the information in front of you. And again, that's going to happen at all levels. So the attitude adjustments that I share, starting with critical thinking, are not unique to quote unquote leadership positions or what might be traditionally thought of as leadership positions, be it a manager, supervisor, director, etc. These are attributes, these are traits and qualities that exist at all levels. So again, critical thinking, the ability to process information. Number two, communication skills. No, again, no big surprise here. We're not talking about rocket science, but being able to communicate from a horizontal perspective, so peer to peer, coworker to coworker, partner to partner, across departments, across organizations, interagency, interbusiness, business to business communication, just being able to describe the value proposition of your organization, your role, your activities, your duties, and how to further the activity, the vision of the organization. And then thirdly, initiative. And this, I think, of the three is the more challenging one because there is a very tight balance between showing initiative and maybe kind of overstepping, crossing over into areas of accountability and responsibility that may not belong to you. However, from my perspective, and I'm not going to speak for every organization, I can only speak for me. From my perspective, I would much rather have to dial someone back on the organization because they're pushing too hard and they're going too fast and they're crossing over into too many areas, rather than have to pull someone along and try to inspire, coax, or motivate someone to do more. I think it's always better for individuals to err on the side of doing more as opposed to doing less. So, what we have consistently heard and read through research and conversations is, again, critical thinking, communication, and initiative. Those three, if folks start with kind of those three as a base, they will put themselves in a very positive position for growth and advancement within any organization.
So let's stay here for a while because I think you just hit on three things that are just vital. And I want to put a pin here for a lot of people watching. Charles said, and I agree with this, and this is essential for anybody at any level. These things that we're talking about is not exclusive to leaders with titles. This is for anybody who is aspiring, who is just looking to become a leader, and for folks who are on the front line. But let's start here, Charles. You talked about critical thinking. If
Yeah.
I am someone who is on the front line creating widgets, why do I need to have critical thinking skills when I'm following a robotic process to do my job?
Yep. So it has been important. Being able to critically think has been important for a long time. It becomes increasingly more important now, I think, in particular, and I love the example that you use here, William, the idea of just producing something. Whether you're in a literal factory and you're producing a product, Or you're someone that works in an organization like ours where maybe you're meeting with clients, you're meeting with customers, and you're doing a lot of data entry, a lot of somewhat monotonous transactional work that can be repetitive. The What we're seeing in the economy, I'm going to use a term some folks may have heard, it may be new to some others, is automation. And as we look at the explosion of technology, and folks are very familiar with the idea that technology has just been growing at an increasing rate, not only in our country, in our world. And as we look at automation, which is machines doing some of that very repetitive work, and not just in factories. I mean, machines and computers and artificial intelligence and those kinds of programs are permeating all industries. So there's no industry, human service included, is safe from automation. So being able to critically think is what makes you competitive in an environment where repetitive tasks are being essentially taken over by machines and computing and technology. So your one of your biggest assets as a human being is your ability to think, your ability to process information. Machines are only going to be able to perform what they're programmed to do. You, as a human being, have creativity, you have experience, you have improvisation, you have, again, all of that falls under the umbrella of critical thinking, being able to process all this information, and that happens at all levels. So as someone that may be a more seasoned employee that's been doing kind of the same thing for several years, you have experience that you can draw on. You have interactions that you've had in the past that inform kind of your decision making in the future. And for folks that are just starting out, maybe you're brand new in a particular field, you have your own experience, but you also have the ability to sort of think outside of the way things have always been done. And I always encourage people to embrace the idea that you're new to an industry, to an organization, to a sector, because you have an outside perspective. And that's another way that you can differentiate yourself, in particular from a piece of technology that's programmed to do the same thing over and over and over again. As a human being, you bring those experiences, but also, again, that outside perspective, particularly as someone new, that's going to set you apart and make you competitive.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing when you say this stuff, Charles, is that we cannot fight or avoid automation, right? And given the industries that you and I dabble in as a result of our work, some industries are going to lend themselves to more automation or faster automation than others. What I'm hearing
That's
you
right.
say, and this is what I want to leave with people as they're processing this conversation during this entire session, is the critical thinking helps you figure out how to deploy automated functions. And that's where the difference lies, right? So if you're in a job where you're managing or overseeing or utilizing an automated machine, if you're able to figure out how to deploy that machine within reason, within the rules of the company, it makes you more valuable, because if you can get more productivity out of the machine, then that makes you a master user, which is terminology I've heard over the past couple years in the industry that we're in, right? Becoming a master user.
Good.
And the master user
That's
now
good.
becomes a teacher or an instructor or now a supervisor or someone who oversees quality assurance, who oversees a line staff of their own, a department, etc. And this conversation, particularly for people who don't have a degree, this is how you start to escalate your career without a degree. And I'm not going to say, Charles, that a degree is not important. You and I both have advanced degrees. We've worked in academia, higher education. So you and I believe in that, and there's value in that. But if you feel that going to college is not for you and you're trying to figure out how to still steadily move up that chart or that ladder to obtain family sustaining wages, this is how it starts, right? Not being afraid of the automated functions, but
Right.
figuring out how to deploy them. So what can we say, Charles, in this conversation to someone who is saying, all right, great, give me an example of how to deploy an automated machine or automated function in my job? What example can we give? What advice can we give to those persons who are asking that question to us?
Yeah, it's a good one. And as I answer that question, I also want to circle back to something that you just said in terms of being a master user and looking at opportunities to climb and progress. For folks that can't afford college, maybe aren't interested in college, and maybe really enjoy what they do. So I think you're also going to have listeners that will say, "Well, this is all great, but I love my job. I love where I am. I have no interest in advancing to be a manager. I have no interest in being a supervisor. I have no interest in maybe even necessarily taking on other projects and activities. I'm really good at what I do, and I just want to continue to do this." And what I would say to that individual, as well as the individual that may be interested in advancing, is you still want to listen in, because no position, as we said previously, is going to be safe. So in order for you to maintain your employ, you still want to implement these strategies and these resources and these initiatives that we're discussing, because you're good at your position today doesn't mean the organization isn't actively looking for opportunities to get better,
Right.
either through technology or through another individual.
Mm.
So, as we talk about being entrepreneurial minded, as we talk about managing your career as a business owner, that's one of the qualities that we want to continue to reinforce to folks, is that you constantly want to seek to be better, to do more, to get better. Even if the goal is to remain where you are, in order to remain where you are, you have to get better. You have to be better. For businesses to stay in business, they got to innovate, they got to improve, they got to stay profitable, even if they're not necessarily looking to expand or grow. So the same is true for an employee. To answer the question specifically about an example, I mean, I think about in particular, and again, I'll just talk about where I happen to be employed on a full-time basis. We use a couple of different software programs to help us track and monitor the progress of individuals that are making their way through the programs that are funded by the tax dollars that we pay. And so the software that we use is designed, again, to really track and record and monitor that activity. And the software is increasingly becoming more sophisticated in its ability to not only track data that's entered, but the analytics and the reporting gives us the ability to begin to forecast and think about how many more people may access the center, how many people have accessed the center historically, and what we can do with that information. Individuals that become master users of the software, that are very comfortable with the reporting functions, that can manipulate the reports to provide new insightful data to give us a better look at who we're serving and how we can more effectively serve those individuals, so that the amount of time they're in our programs decreases, because we're getting people skilled and we're getting people employed. Those individuals are going to continue to find success in our organization. And the individuals that, again, are just kind of ticking the clock, just users doing just enough to keep up, that maybe are having difficulty keeping up, those individuals, unfortunately, are not going to find themselves in a position where they can maintain, because more and more individuals are becoming more integrated with the technology and becoming more comfortable with utilizing and manipulating the technology in particular.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I just jotted a note down here as you were talking, and the note says the little things. Notice the little things that make a difference, and those little things can be um, the difference between profitability or overrunning the budget. And these are things that may not matter to the person on the front line, but it matters to someone at the job. But notice little things, and these little things. The reason why I'm pointing this out, Charles, is because some folks may say, "I don't know how to be a critical thinker." right?
Mm.
I
Yeah.
didn't do well on standardized tests. I barely got my GED or high school diploma. I didn't finish college, and it wasn't for me. So for you to tell me to be the critical thinker, I don't know what that means. So for me, Charles, as I was thinking about this, it's the little things that matter. So if
Mm.
you're at a manufacturing center, right, which is kind of something in our wheelhouse, and you're working on the front line operating a machine, if you notice that a machine, which can be very expensive or and very complicated to use, can be improved by doing one little tweak.
Yep.
Or if you notice that if you come in, let's say, 20 minutes earlier for work, and you start to warm the machine up and start to make sure all the functions are ready to go by the time you're ready to start your job, and because of that little change, the
Yep.
machine works better, it works more efficient, it's more productive. If you notice that, take note of this, right? And I would encourage you as a listener to journal about this stuff. I'm a big fan of journaling. And the reason for that, Charles, is when no one is going to listen to you, to be honest with you, about the things you're noticing, your journal is your best friend at work. You get to
Yep.
process your ideas, you get to process concepts, you get to see how crazy you sound, you get to see how smart you sound. And at the end of the day, when you bring it all together, these little things start to add up. And when you start to produce more work, better work, more efficient work, faster work, and people ask you, or your supervisor asks you, Charles, what's the difference? You can go back to your journal and say, well, I noticed this about 2 months ago. I
That's right.
started coming to work about 20 minutes earlier, warmed up the machine, make sure all of the functions were ready to go when I started working at 9 o'clock. And when I started working at 9 o'clock, the machine was just ready to go. That's a huge difference because my counterparts, the machine doesn't warm up until 9:20, 9:30, therefore
Sure.
making them less productive. That little change is what we're talking about. And that's what we call critical thinking.
That's very good.
So then
That's very
this is a segue into the second point you made, which is you first mentioned critical thinking. The next thing you mentioned was communication skills. And I think the
right.
example I provided is an example of how communication skills is put to work. But what comes to mind when you say critical thinking is something employers are desperately in need of today for job seekers?
Yeah. So, I mean, interestingly enough, in terms of how do I become a critical thinker? How do I become better at critical thinking or communicating? Charles, I'm not a public speaker. It's not something that I've ever really done before. Dr. Clark, I don't write well. That's something that I struggled with. And so, how do I communicate on a job? Maybe I work by myself. I work in a corner. I'm in front of a monitor all day, or I'm on the line. I'm the third person on this assembly line. I'm a picker. I'm a packer. I don't get an opportunity to communicate a lot with certainly my managers or my peers. So how do I do that? I love the idea of it's the little things. It's seizing on every opportunity that you've been given. And it's taking advantage of what's out there. Listening to podcasts like this is a way to improve your communication skills.
Yep.
I am blessed that I was raised by a teacher. God love my mom. Shout out to Ruth Loving Davis, who I'm sure will be listening to this. Second grade teacher in the Boston Public School System. So she communicated for a living. And I was certainly blessed to be raised in a household where communication was a part of our everyday interaction. At the same time, I was also raised by a tradesman, by a journeyman. My dad is a plumber and welder who did not get paid to communicate necessarily, but communication was critical for him, whether he was working independently as a 1099 plumber or he was working for a number of organizations where he has worked as a journeyman, particularly in the trades. If you aren't effective at communicating, and we're not talking about making a speech, we're talking about being able to inform your colleagues, your employer as to your progress, as to your observations. That's communication. Whether you do that written or you do that oral, it becomes essential to your ability to maintain employment, and it becomes critical for the organization's ability to grow and succeed. So how do we acquire these skills? Well, one of the things that I used to do that I'm a big believer in is I would talk to myself out loud in the car, at home, in the bedroom, in the bathroom. I would, if I had an idea, if I had a thought, I would discuss it out loud to myself. As crazy as that sounds, that's one of the ways that I developed my ability to communicate, and in particular, to communicate succinctly. What we mean by that is less words, less time to communicate a thought or idea. You don't have a lot of time in every role, in every industry, in every occupation to take 5 or 10 minutes to communicate an idea. And in a classroom, as a teacher, or as a journeyman tradesperson, many times you have to communicate an idea quickly. If you want to keep the attention of a room full of 8, 9-year-old second graders, or if you are responsible for adjusting a pipe, adjusting a sewage system, and you're working on a team of 3 or 4, and the pipe is about to burst, and there's going to be debris all over the place. In both of those examples, you have to be able to communicate quickly and effectively. One of the ways that I found to do that is, again, to talk to myself out loud. I'm not an avid reader, Dr. Clark. That may come as a surprise to you. I don't enjoy the activity of sitting down and flipping through pages or reading on a screen. I do what I have to in order to stay abreast, to research in my industry. But what has become a game changer for me is audiobooks. And there are apps like Audible and others that have really just sort of opened my horizon. So I've got a couple of apps where I'm listening to podcasts, and then I've got some audio book apps. And that's another way that I gain information, think through that information in order to be able to, again, think and communicate. There's a ton of information out there, folks. There's lots of resources, technology. There's a reason why we call this the information age. And so there really isn't any excuse, regardless of your education, regardless of your background, regardless of your ability level. You may be someone that's living with a disability. You may be hearing impaired. You may be visually impaired. Technology exists to really close that gap and to get us access to this information out there. What it comes down to, and I know that we'll get to this in a second, what it comes down to is your initiative. Are you willing to get out there and find these resources, find this information in order to improve yourself and improve your organization? And that is up to the individual.
There's so much to react to. Man, before I started preaching years ago, my first pulpit was my shower.
Yes, sir.
The shower. Sir. The shower is like the place.
To yourself.
Just preach it to yourself. You practice. You can hear the echo, just like people sing in the shower. No, seriously, the shower is like the best place to practice. So I'm a big fan of that. So let me react to some earlier stuff you said. I keep thinking, Charles, about the person who says, "I don't know how to do this stuff," and they just so happen to be watching this podcast or listening. Here's a quick formula I thought about as you were talking about communication. You referenced your mom and your dad, because even in your dad's profession, for safety reasons, for productivity reasons, for the sake of teamwork, especially if he's on a big project, communication is critical. If you're wondering what to communicate, here's just a quick, simple formula. I encourage you to look at other solutions, but here's a quick one, right? First, articulate what's the problem. Right. Number 2, articulate what is the solution. Number 3, articulate how to deploy the solution. And number 4, articulate how to monitor the progress when a solution is being deployed. So what, how. This is not all inclusive. And I encourage folks to find a better formula that fits you. But if you're trying to just start and get in the mode of communicating, what is the problem, what is the solution, how to deploy the solution, how to monitor the progress. And all of this is critical in any profession. I mean, even for our frontline professions that require manual labor. And again, your dad is an awesome example, because that is a representation of part of our client base, people who don't necessarily have office jobs, but communication is critical. Employers want people not only to have the great soft skills, but another thing I've been hearing, Charles, that is so vital, particularly when you're dealing with machinery and tools and material, is safety habits. And is not just acting and behaving in a way that is safe, but communicating in a way that is safe. So code words, not using words that may incite a behavior that can create danger, or highlighting to someone, hey, look out for X, Y, and Z because there's danger. It is the act of articulating clearly what's in front of you and what's being experienced so that your coworkers, so that supervisors, so that customers can feel like they are in the loop of what's going on. And this works whether we're talking about frontline staff or whether we're talking about you and I who have office jobs or others, small business owners. It just works together. And at the end of the day, what I'm thinking about, Charles, is when we talk about people having critical thinking skills, that's what's necessary for people to lead others. But then you're going to need communication skills to articulate what you're critically thinking about.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. There's no exception. We talked about last time, Charles, is it appropriate for, or what roles or what individuals is it appropriate for when we talk about accomplishments? Remember, we talked about accomplishments and value. And my feedback is it's appropriate for everyone at all levels. If you're just starting out, if you're in the middle of your career, towards the end of your career, being able to describe your accomplishments, your value, your impact is appropriate for everyone at all levels. So it is with these attributes that we're talking about. Thinking and communicating is appropriate for everyone at all levels, across all industries, across all occupations. You have to be able to communicate thoughts, ideas, policy, activity, procedure. These are essential attributes. These are essential skills that apply across the board. And in order for individuals to maintain, to grow, to advance, to transition, to move on, to remain in place, these are things that you're not going to be able to get away from. I read an interesting article and kind of prepping for this conversation. It was in the Hartford Courant. It was talking about employees that are ghosting, that are leaving work, no call, no shows, right? They got another opportunity, so they're just taking off, no 2-week notice, like 2-week notice. What is that? You know what I mean? So folks are just disappearing because the economy is doing so well right now. And what I would say to folks that are maybe listening to the conversation and saying, you know what, that's all well and good. I don't need that. I work in a warehouse. I drive this forklift. Like, I just show up. My boss tells me what needs to get done today. I do what needs to get done. I'm efficient. I don't cause any trouble. I'm good. And what I would say to that individual, and what I would say to the individuals that have been ghosting their last couple of opportunities is, folks, look at our economy. Look at the trend over the last century. This stuff goes up and down. Yes, we are at a 20-year high right now. Don't think that things can't turn around. Ask our brothers and sisters that are in TSA right now, that are working at Borders and Customs, that are in the middle of this temporary government shutdown, that are working without pay. Like, this stuff can change in an instant. And if you are someone that is thinking, I don't need this, I'm not interested, I don't want it, you're wrong, because the economy today may not be the economy of tomorrow. Certainly is not likely to be the economy 5, 10, 15 years from now. So this conversation, these attributes, these skills that we're trying to impart to folks, please embrace it. Please embrace it for the benefit of yourselves and your families, because as great as things are right now, I mean, we just 10 years ago, guys, the Great Recession was just 10 years ago.
Yes, it was.
It can turn around like that in a heartbeat.
Man, and so this is a great segue and plug. I just did a podcast with Galen Bingham talking about ghosting. He's a small business owner in the Midwest, and the whole hour was about ghosting. And his small business is impacted because of people ghosting. So go check out that podcast if you're listening, because there's a lot of truth in what Charles said. And one of the things we said, Charles, in that podcast was, when it comes time to uh, receive opportunities, it's the people that you played or ghosted that will have the opportunities that you're looking for.
So true.
But and there's an off chance that that small business owner like Galen will remember that you ghosted him. And when you really need that opportunity to come through,
Mm.
he's likely not to extend that hand because he remembers what you did
Right.
when the economy was great and you didn't see a need or value for him.
Right.
Other thing I wanted to respond to before we move on to the next point, I love Audible. Given the busyness of my life,
Yeah.
kids, wife, work, church, etc.,
Yeah.
it's difficult to sit down and read as I would like to. And I get a lot of that done physically, the literal reading in terms of eyeballs on paper or tablet. But man, in the middle of driving, in the middle of washing bottles, changing diapers, doing all types of stuff around the house, I'm still able to read through Audible. The
Yeah.
reason why, guys, Charles suggested this, the reason why I suggest this is because the more you're able to hear other people articulate things that are relevant to you, your career, your work, it
Yes,
gives
sir.
you terminology on how to use the terminology, how to put words together, how to
Right.
communicate in sentences. And this is not, Charles, this is not an attack on people who may not be able to talk, quote, correctly, but this is even for people like you and I learning how to say what we want to say better, even though we thought we said it better before. And there
Yep.
are always better ways to communicate your thoughts and perspectives, particularly as you continue to meet new people. And if you're
Right.
looking to advance your leadership, you're an emerging leader, or if you're an established leader, or you're someone who doesn't see yourself as a leader, constantly reading. Charles mentioned Audible. He also mentioned the newspaper here local to us
Hmm.
that's not only local papers but national papers or national articles or blogs or whatever. I'm a big fan of YouTube, watching those videos and watching people communicate and articulate, right?
Yep.
The news, the traditional news, maybe some of your favorite shows. I mean, Charles, one of my favorite shows, everybody loves Shark Tank, right? But my favorite business show is actually The Profit, because The
Yeah.
Profit is
Yeah.
Shark Tank after Shark Tank. It's the real, it's like the behind the scenes stuff. Everything we're talking about today, everything we talked about in our last session, Marcus Lemonis, one of my favorite guys, goes into detail. And when you listen to him talk about
Yep.
widgets, productivity, about people, about products, and how all that works together in whatever business that he's taking over or running, you understand, right? And if you're looking to better understand your role as a frontline person in a manufacturing facility or in a distribution facility or in a storage facility, and you're trying to advance your career, the more you can understand what your boss knows, the language they're speaking, the numbers that they're looking at, it changes your perspective on a front line completely. Not only do you have a better appreciation, Charles, but now you start to think like someone who's going to one day be a manager, a supervisor, maybe a department lead, maybe a vice president, maybe a
Right.
business owner. Who
Right.
knows? It
Right.
starts by understanding that language. And if you're not reading, you're not listening, you're not watching, you're not paying attention, you're really hurting yourself. And it doesn't matter if you want a promotion or not, it's just for your own good.
That's right. Right. Yep. Your own personal development. I mean, what we're
Yeah.
talking about in terms of emerging leaders, we talked last time that leadership happens at all levels. You don't need a title to be a leader. What you are trying to do through this vehicle, which I'm such a supporter of, such a fan of, is growing the spirit of leadership amongst individuals at all levels, at all demographics. You mentioned something a few minutes ago when we were talking about in terms of safety, working safely, that organizations and employers are looking for people that appreciate safety, quality assurance. You said something, you used a word, you said the word terminology, safe terminology, terminology in general. One of the things that I think is underappreciated when it comes to communication is terminology. I would encourage folks to listen even to their favorite programs. So I'm a huge football fan. College football is kind of my favorite. The NFL is just maybe one step behind that. So during this time of year, I am all in on a number of talking heads, kind of sports talk radio programs, because I am just ingesting all of that content. But over the years, I've started to listen to those individuals with a different ear because they get paid to talk. That's what they get paid to do. And so as you listen to those individuals break down a game, talk about the backstories, talk about game prep and statistics, and when you're just listening to those shows, listen to how they're communicating. Specifically, listen to the terminology. Listen to the words they use in order to communicate an idea or a thought. I would just share this example from my personal life, and then we can kind of move forward without going into a lot of detail. Folks that are familiar with me, familiar with my family, are aware that we interact a lot with the healthcare system in the United States. Our daughter, our blessed miracle, our middle child, puts us in a position where we interact a lot with the medical profession, with medical professionals. And one of the things that my wife and I learned very quickly was, in order for us to get what our daughter needed, in order to access the services, the support, the resources that she needed, we had to learn the terminology. When you can communicate with a medical professional, with a plumbing professional, with an educational professional, with a human services professional, with a retail professional, when you can communicate with industry folks using terminology that is familiar to them in their industry, it shifts the conversation. And it puts you in a different level with that individual in terms of your understanding, in terms of your awareness. So you get treated differently. Good, bad, or indifferent, you get treated differently. The conversations that my wife and I are able to have with medical providers, because we understand and can utilize the terminology, puts us in a different place than individuals that don't. Now, do we work with unethical people that give us better services because we speak differently? No, absolutely not. But it does shift the conversation, and it gets us in a place where we can be more effective. We can be more, I'll use the word again, succinct in our communication, because we're using the same terminology. That's the benefit, folks, to studying your communication, is that it puts you in a different place to have a different level of conversation with individuals with whom you're interacting, in order to forward the conversation and be more effective, get you what you need, get your team what it needs, get your organization what it needs in order to be effective and grow.
Man, I hope people are really listening to what you're saying. I might steal this. You said this show is trying to grow the spirit of leadership. And when you said that, it struck me hard, because it spoke to what I feel like I've been trying to do since I moved to the area. And that's probably a deeper conversation offline, but I might actually steal that, Charles.
Please.
But
you don't even have to copyright. That's all yours.
You're on record. Thank
you.
No
attribution necessary.
But, as you were talking about your daughter, your wife, you, and how understanding and regurgitating terminology changes how you're treated.
Yes.
How people look at you, how people handle you. Professionally, it is the same way. Yes. When you're able to show and intelligently digest and regurgitate terminology that those above you in northern relationships understand, it changes the trust level they have in you. Yes. It changes the respect level they have in you. Let's go back to the manufacturing example. So I find out that if I show up 20 minutes early and I set up my machine that costs multiple millions of dollars early, it allows me to be the most productive individual for the next 8 hours. And I start to talk about language such as productivity, time management, efficiency, and ultimately the bottom line, that captures everybody's attention that signs checks
Yep.
and reviews timesheets. And when they're looking for a promotion, they're looking to advance someone to manage a different department, the same department, a new business opportunity. Who do you think they're going to call upon? They're not going to call upon the person wishing for an advancement, wishing for a promotion, wishing for more money. They're going to call upon a person that has proven that they've captured and understood this information. This whole conversation today, Charles, we haven't even gotten to the other questions. This whole conversation was about how do you run your career like a business and as an entrepreneur. And dare I say, what we've talked about in this time that we've been together has hit that, right? If we don't talk about anything else, you have to have these things in place. And not last is the ability to understand terminology. I mean, even if you're in the culinary and customer service field, in my opinion, and others who are professionals may have a different opinion, but in my opinion, my humble opinion, I would be watching Gordon Ramsay and every HGTV and Food Network show I can get my eyeballs on.
Right.
Now, I was talking to someone recently and they said this is really not reality, right? Because of the way, the theatrics of the show. I get it. I totally get it.
Right.
But there are elements of truth to every fictional experience. Mm-hmm. And if I'm in that field, I want to see what people are doing. I understand there are made-for-TV experiences. I understand that, yeah, you can't make a 3-course meal in 2 minutes time because that's all edited out. But man, I'm taking notice of how the critics of the show are critically evaluating the product that was just plated.
Yep.
And if I know that they're looking at it and they're restaurateurs, they're professionals, they have multiple businesses, at a minimum, there are lessons to be learned in that 2-minute clip. If I understand the teamwork that Gordon Ramsay promotes in his shows, then that tells me something about what it's like to be on the line cook staff behind a kitchen counter. Or the role I play if I'm a server or someone who is serving the needs of the customer in another way, right? Yep. At the end of the day, what you're saying, Charles, is you have to be in a position, and this goes back to the definition of communication. It's a two-way street. It's not only talking, but listening and receiving. You have to be in a position to receive as a part of the communication platform and mechanism. And what we're saying is whatever that industry is that you're into, watch and consume everything relevant about your industry, because now, Charles, as we know, what comes out of you, as Jesus taught, is whatever is put inside of you. It comes from the heart. So if there's nothing inside of you, no terminology, no language, no standards, no books, no videos, no audio language. You don't have a mentor. You're not going to conferences. You're not listening to webinars. You're not reading up on anything new. Then there's nothing coming into you that's new. Because when you open your mouth, what's going to come out is nothing.
Right.
A bunch of wishes and hoping and I wish they would look my way. No, that's not how that works.
Doesn't work that way. No, you're absolutely right, and I think it segues kind of to the final point, the final attribute we've talked about, initiative.
Yeah,
and that's taking the initiative to learn more, taking the initiative to seek out these opportunities, taking the initiative to show up 20 minutes early. Your manager didn't tell you to show up 20 minutes early to start the machine so that right at 9 o'clock you're already beginning the production for the day. No one told you to do that. You took it upon yourself to do it. You took it upon yourself to read an article about the changes in your industry. You took it upon yourself to listen to this podcast on emerging leadership. You took it upon yourself to read a book, to read an article. You took it upon yourself to interview your manager, to interview your boss's boss. We talked briefly, I just sort of mentioned the terminology, mentioned the term last conversation about an informational interview and networking. We said networking is one of the best ways to grow and advance, to learn more about. Have a conversation, have an offline conversation with your manager if they're open to it, with your manager's manager if they're open to it, with someone that's been a part of the organization for several years, someone that's been there longer than you, someone that's done something different than you. Take them to coffee, take them to lunch, invite them over. friend them on Facebook, connect with them on LinkedIn, engage these individuals in a dialogue to help you ingest, to take in more than what you currently know about your role, about your position, about your industry. And that comes with initiative. It comes with you deciding, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to step forward. I'm going to step up. Again, you're always going to be respected by an organization for doing more. You want to put yourself in a position where your manager needs to come to you and say, Leroy, Maria, you're doing a great job. We need you to just dial it back a little bit. We're not in the position where we're ready to do that. Or, I appreciate the initiative. I appreciate the effort. We'll inform you when we're ready to take that next step or what have you. But you want to be in that position rather than the position where your manager comes to you and says, unfortunately, we're in a position where we're having to make some tough decisions, and we're going to go in a different direction. We just didn't see enough from you. You don't ever want to be in that position. And so taking the initiative to learn, research, study, network, informational interview is what's going to give you the intake so that when come time to communicate, you've got some output based on what you've taken in.
Man, I hate for this conversation, and I'm just going to say that when it comes to initiative, I love what you said. You have to decide to do something. And dare I say to anybody watching this podcast that the decision to do something is not in competition with your coworkers or your peers. You are in competition with yourself. Now, I'm sure this is a cliche statement you've heard, that you're in competition with yourself, but let me just share what I'm thinking. And Charles, you might want to react to this. When I'm saying when you're in competition with yourself, I'm going to quote a mentor of mine who said that it is okay to be obsessed with your tomorrow, obsessed with your today, obsessed with getting better, obsessed with improving efficiency. And that obsession doesn't come as a result of other people saying, hey, I'm trying to outdo you. That obsession is a result of an internal wiring, an internal push that says, I want to be better because I want to. There's no other reason other than that motivation, that I just want to be better. I want to do more. And if you're going to take that responsibility of saying, I'm going to do more, that, my friends, is what we call initiative. This is also, in my world, Charles, what we call self-leadership, because I don't need you to motivate me or influence me. I don't need you to dangle a carrot in front of me to do better or do different. I don't need you to bribe me. I don't need you to suggest that my promotion is going to come if I change behaviors. Self-leaders say, I'm already motivated internally. And because of my internal motivation, my desire to do something, the decision-making I've made to do better for me and me only, and it benefits or aligns with the objectives of the company or the department, I am going to move forward. And this, I think, is probably the appropriate way to close this conversation, because when you're looking at a business owner, an entrepreneur, there is no motivation besides whatever it's in you. Now, you can say, I'm starting a business for money, man. You can work for money, right? That can't be it. The motivation is, I want to do something. And that something has nothing to do with compensation. There is no further promotion when you're an entrepreneur. You're the CEO.
That's right.
So it can't be a title. And even when you're working for someone, it just can't be. There has to be something else that is pushing you, that's giving you that oomph that you just can't put into words, that makes you want to be better. This goes for every person, top to bottom. There has to be a hunger inside of you that makes you want to do more. In short, that's what initiative is. As we close, I mean, is there anything else you want to share, Charles? Any closing thoughts? Anything else you want to just give the people before we close?
Yeah, we're talking about audiobooks. So I believe the author is Simon Sinek, but the book is Start with the Why. And you hit the nail exactly on the head, Dr. Clark. Why? and money isn't a why. When we talk to folks, particularly when we talk to folks about sort of, having that entrepreneurial mindset, we start with, okay, we get it. Money, we all need money. We have to earn a living. So your reason to go to work, your reason to start a business, your reason to advance shouldn't be money. That's understood. We appreciate that. Now that we got it, that money is a motivator for all of us. Why? Legacy, family, contribution, creativity. Why? Why go to work? Why get out of bed every day? Why start a business? Why this career? Why this industry? Why this occupation? Start with your why. If you know what your why is, that becomes your internal motivation. That becomes your driving force. That's what gets you going every day. And if you know what your why is, then you can pursue knowledge. You can pursue knowledge like a fiend. To your perspective, you can be obsessed with you. You can be obsessed with your growth, with your path, with your course, with your trajectory, because you know what your why is. You start with your why, everything else will fall in line.
Man, I can't say it no better than that. Any self-serving promotion you want to do right now?
I would encourage folks again to engage in the American Job Center. We told folks if they're interested in getting in touch with me personally that one of the easiest ways is to Google. My last name is spelled B as in boy, OTTS. If you want to be very specific, I use my suffix a lot, the third, Charles Botts the third. If you put Charles Botts and 3 I's, the Roman numeral for 3 uppercase I's, you'll get in touch with my Twitter, my Instagram, my LinkedIn, my Facebook. All of that is there. And, I'm happy to interact and continue the conversation with folks offline and selfishly online. I hope this is the beginning of maybe a reoccurrence with you and I, Dr. Clark. This was a lot of fun, and I'm happy to appear on the show anytime you'll have me.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. We didn't even get to the other 3 or 4 questions we had. I know that offline we've been talking about, we're talking about doing another session with a friend of mine, talking about resume development.
Yep.
I would just say, for those of you who've watched the last 2 sessions or listened to the last 2 sessions with Charles and I, if you liked it, I think you're going to like it even more when we do this live webinar. I think we're still nailing down the details, but
Yep.
this friend has a whole lot of personality and energy that she's going to add to this conversation. And I think that this is going to be, in my opinion, explosive. And for those of you just looking for insight, the inside track, you're looking for those tips and tricks, I'm going to encourage you to look out for this live webinar course, either on my platforms at Dr. William P. Clark, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, or on Charles's platforms that he just shared, or even on your favorite podcasting platform. Replay this, subscribe, but pay attention to the upcoming course that we're going to be doing with Charles and this mystery friend of mine. And Charles, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Will, my pleasure, sir. I appreciate you.